Good evening, Uganda, and welcome to this edition of the On the Spot. I always appear on the fourth estate on Sunday, so the mind is engineered to imagine this is the fourth estate. Welcome to this edition of On the Spot. I'm Ivan Okuda, sitting in for Mr. Patrick Kamara, who for reasons beyond his own control and those beyond control of NTV was not able to join us tonight. And on the spot, the gruesome murder of Susan Magara, who was kidnapped here in Kampala on the 7th day of February and held captive for 20 days, has raised critical questions on the state of security in our country. During the burial of Susan Magara in Hoima district today, the Security Minister General Henry Tumukunde did apologize for government's failure to rescue this lady, a daughter of Mr. John Magara. Susan's murder brings to the further debate the state of our security following the brutal murder of over 19 women in NTV, Katavi, and Nansana in Wakiso district in the third and fourth quarter of the year 2017, and nobody has since this day been successfully processed through the prosecution or even the investigation by the state. And yet for the Wakiso murders, the investigations continue. We also have unresolved murders in respect of the Muslim clerics, unresolved murders in respect of the citizens of this country from Masaka region or the sub-region of Masaka, and of course several other districts of Uganda. Tonight I'm joined by Professor Christopher Mbazira from the School of Law of Makerere University. He is Principal, School of Law. You're welcome, Prof.
Thank you, Ivan. And
on his left is Mr. Timothy Kalejera, who is editor of the Kampala Express. He is a columnist with the Sunday Monitor, a seasoned journalist and a social critic, a man of so many titles in his own right. You're welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
And Leah Erenyu, who is a political analyst and head of research and advocacy at Akina Mamawa Africa. You're welcome, Leah.
Thank you, Ivan.
Tim, you have yet another murder. And of course, characteristically, the president releases a statement. The ministers release statements, and everybody else on social media is giving commentary. Is there any particular reason why this specific murder arose the kind of public and media interest that it did, when you have a spate of killings that have essentially made murders in this part of the world an everyday affair?
I've read the president's statement.
Yes, I have.
That's uncharacteristic. If you see the language, you know, it sounds like he's a shrine and Bazukuru, don't do this, that, and the other. I found that strange. The strangest of all was the language of the statement, which of course raised a few eyebrows, but we'll be discussing this during the show. So, what do I say about that? It is Uganda, dysfunctional to the core, and the excesses of the society, the disproportional reaction. Yes, women died, it's anonymous, and then one or two people who's not been in the news for any reason, suddenly it's eulogized for reasons nobody can explain. I've got a few theories about that, but well, that's what the show is about.
Do all lives matter in this country, Leah? You have people killed almost on a daily. It's not strange to tune into your radio station early in the morning and your eardrums are, treated to horror stories of deaths occurring in different parts of the country. And of course, some deaths seem to attract more attention, sometimes even presidential attention, and ministers going to bury and making statements and even apologies. Not many Ugandans enjoy that privilege.
Yeah.
Does this say anything particular about our state of affairs?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, all lives matter, but some matter more than others. They don't matter equally. I think one of the issues that has come to the fore with Susan's murder, may her soul rest in peace, is the issue of class. And perhaps Tim tried to skirt around the issue, but perhaps I think it needs to be said. For several weeks in 2017, nameless women were murdered. There was no effort on the part of the journalists, there was no effort on the part of the police to humanize these women. They remain statistics. And since they were never humanized, the public was scared but was never really invested in these women's security and in their deaths and in the state of their families. And then to make matters worse, you know, there were some conversations that said these were women that carried out sex work. So basically, they didn't fit into a perfect narrative, or they were not the perfect victims. They worked during the night, and so people would then say, oh, you know, morality has declined, and so these women should be at home in their houses, sleeping, tending to their children. And now you have a 28-year-old young woman from a very wealthy family who is actually going to the gym. She's doing the right thing, so it no longer fits into the narrative. And so she's humanized. The campaign started with, you know, quite a few of her friends on social media saying, let's find Susan. Her pictures were posted everywhere. She's very, very telegenic. So she was a perfect victim. And then everybody talked about how nice, how beautiful her soul was as well. So I got to know all these things. And she's not somebody that I know personally. And who knows, the other women could have also had very beautiful souls, but we never got to know that.
What is it?
So then, and then to make matters worse, when she's murdered, then the police decides to give, to put out a bounty of 100 million shillings, which for me is very tone deaf. You've had situations where tear gas canisters have been cast into people's homes and children have lost lives. And the police, the police chief will come to the funeral and give 5 million shillings, which could never, of course, even restore that life or compensate for the grief that the family is feeling. So yeah, I think we need to talk about class, and it's important for us to emphasize that, yes, you know, the other women that we don't care about, or the other people that are everyday Ugandans might be dying, and we might not care about it, but before we know it, it might be us. Like, none of us are safe anymore, so it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor and what kind of ethnicity you come from.
Professor, if you have a murder that attracts and catches the eye of the president, and the president, from what we're informed from the family, picks interest in this investigation and ostensibly attempts to be part of the rescue efforts from his level. And the next phone call that the father of this lady gets is one from the president to announce the discovery of the body. What does this say if the president, who is supposed to be in a state like Uganda, the last resort for any person who possibly feels that security has been compromised? So if the highest office cannot be of any help, how safe are we?
You know, it raises questions regarding the efficiency of the state structure. And when one looks at the state structure, it operates at different levels. But the most important is the grassroots. And if you're going to determine the efficiency of the state, you should actually determine the efficiency of the state at the village level or the parish level. And this applies across the board. It does not matter what agency you are looking at. So in terms of maintenance of law and order and the functionality of the police, you have to look at the smallest police post and determine the efficiency of that police post, because crime knows no geographical location, crime knows no class, crime knows no regional location or race or whatever. So you have to look at the smallest unit. So if you have such a case, of course, levels of expertise differ. You don't expect the smallest unit to have the same level of expertise, but at least that's where things should start. For instance, if we're looking at police posts, are police posts in position to deal with petty crime, even at that level? If they are not in position to deal with petty crime, then one may want to determine whether they are actually in position to deal with serious crime. And then one goes through the hierarchy of the police up to, I don't know what the hierarchy is at the moment, but I know it goes up to the Inspector General of Police, then it goes through up to the Commander-in-Chief, and one has to determine whether actually all those structures are functional. So the involvement of the president in this case, to me, says maybe there is something we don't know, maybe there is a personal relationship or a connection to the family, maybe that we don't know. But in the absence of that, it raises serious issues. Where were all the other agencies? Where were all the other structures and hierarchies?
And certainly it's not strange, because I've personally done investigations with the Daily Monitor on killings in Teso sub-region. And when we publicized the bubbles of impunity and violence in that part of the country, some families whose plight the president read about were contacted by State House, and then Modicam Kama, the president's PPS, contacts General Kaihura and asks him to follow up on some of these cases. And therefore, and the many other cases where the president has personally picked interest. What does that say about the more than 4,500 unresolved murders over the last 4 years? And many of whom the families may not know even the way to State House, may not know the person to call at the State House switchboard, and therefore has no access to the president. Is there a recourse for anybody who does not reach the highest office in this land?
You see that's the point, because there are so many victims of crime in this country, but it's only a few that actually get to the headlines. It's only a few that get the attention of the media. It's only a few that actually get the president to get involved in the case. But there are so many victims of crime. And as a matter of fact, every life matters, and every victim of crime deserves justice. Every victim of crime deserves attention, and every suspect in a crime deserves to go through the justice system. Of course, we are not expecting the police to resolve all cases 100%, but at least there should be a reasonable, there should be a certain threshold that is met in terms of resolving cases. But there are so many cases that have piled up in this country, and not just murder, but various crimes that have not been resolved by the police. Many times what we see whenever there is a crime that catches the public attention, the police force tries to portray this image of efficiency. It arrests many times, I think, innocent people. They are paraded on television, and 2, 3, 5 years later, you don't hear of any conviction. What happens?
Sometimes even when the confession is being made before the press.
Yeah, you don't hear of any convictions. What happens to those cases?
Mr. Karolis Mogere, who is a lawyer in town, writing in a column in today's copy of the Monitor, says Susan Magara joins a list of other cases that have simply been mismanaged. And therefore, she becomes just another statistic of one of those cases whose actual detail will possibly never be found. Do you agree that, perhaps we've reached that level of despondency and a crisis of confidence?
We have.
To use the title of Chiruna Chiviji's book.
When I received the call from the producer of this show, I nearly declined because I was not sure I'm safe, to move out of the house after 7 p.m. I was not sure I was safe, and we are living in a state of fear, because we see that the agencies, especially the police that are supposed to protect our properties and life, are actually not functional. There are so many loopholes in the way the police force functions. And interestingly, you don't need to be an expert in security matters to see this. All you need to be is an ordinary citizen to see that the police is dysfunctional. The police has over the years lost confidence. I mean, the public has lost confidence in the police. Yet that is key. It is key. People have lost confidence in the police system. People have lost confidence in the judicial system. There is a state of insecurity. Everybody, including criminals, know the police system is not functional. They know the judicial system is not functional. So meaning if you commit a crime, the chances that you get away with it are much higher than the chances that you'll actually pay the price for it.
And Prof, very lastly on you, you are the principal of the School of Law at Makerere University, which trains and churns out hundreds of lawyers every single year. And of course, also as a lawyer with a bias for public interest litigation and human rights and governance, do you at some point get the feeling that perhaps our criminal justice system is simply clogged and just can't deliver? It's a rusty machine that won't take us anywhere. Can people watching this show, can Ugandans who are victims of these heinous crimes still have confidence in the criminal justice system, to which you send many students onto every single year?
As a School of Law, we do our part, and of course I don't appear here in that capacity as principal of the School of Law. I appear in my capacity as a legal expert and a member of the network of public interest lawyers. But nevertheless, I can say something about the legal training that we provide to students. Of course, it has nothing to do with policing, but it has a lot to do with the judicial system. We train lawyers to be efficient. We train lawyers to be a part of the mechanisms for the administration of justice. We train lawyers to contribute to society in so many
Or maybe
ways.
if I may rephrase it.
Yes.
can the justice, law and order sector, as we know it, in this country still be trusted by the citizens of this country to deliver any meaningful change in their own lives?
It has so many challenges. It is broken down in so many respects. Of course, it delivers in some respects, but largely it is broken down. One shortfall, for instance, we see a very huge case backlog in all sectors of the judiciary, whether criminal prosecution or civil matters, land division, whatever division of the courts that you go to. There's a very, very huge case backlog. And of course, that has a very big negative impact on the functionality of the system. We have very few judges, which worsens the case backlog. We also have logistical challenges. The judiciary has serious logistical challenges. For instance, you'll be surprised that many courts are actually in rented premises. I don't know if you've been even to courts that actually rent in what should have been dukas or shops.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the environment is not fit for a judicial institution. The same applies to the Department of Public Prosecution. We know it's also not properly resourced in terms of human resource and personnel. So all those things clog the criminal justice system, they affect its efficiency. Then of course you move downwards to the police, where the police is also constrained in terms of the capacity to carry out investigations efficiently. I don't know even if you've taken enough time to sit at Uganda Road Court or in criminal court. The most common statement there is always investigations are still going on. When you sit in that court, you see a prosecutor walks in with a pile of files. It could be 100 files. But out of the 100, probably less than 10 will actually go to the stage of hearing. But the rest are still under investigation. And the most common statement from a magistrate is that I'm going to dismiss this case because of want of prosecution or because investigations are taking too long. So it's quite a lot that needs to be done. We need to study the criminal justice system, and at all levels, at the police, the level of the police force, at the level of the Directorate of Public Investigation, prosecutions, at the level of the judiciary, at the level of the prison system. I just watched your news at 7, where how can prisoners that are facing charges of murder jump out of the door? It means the court's environment itself is not appropriate for that kind of business. How can they simply jump out of the door and run out of...
Thank you, Prof. Timothy, perhaps this begs a study on the Ugandan state. Some people who are students of the shock therapy, if you've read Naomi Klein in the shock doctrine, that sometimes states do all sorts of ridiculous things, and sometimes with calculated motives. Is it just possible that perhaps somebody is playing the card of incompetence and inability to deliver on investigations for a calculated motive, politically speaking?
Well, you're finally asking the right questions, because the last several minutes have sounded like some law school seminar and whatnot. And that's vague allusions to, back cases of law. We're discussing cases of crime in the country, not the criminal system, not the state and everything. And there's quite a lot of cynicism in the system. These are crimes that are perpetuated clearly by people in the state. Let's just go to the specifics. The whole question we've been discussing on social media about these unregistered SIM cards. And then everybody starts complaining and saying, but how come UCC cut off the unregistered cards and some people still have this? Conclusion, we must then re-register all these SIM cards and say, Ugandans who don't even know what's going on. State security services, the ESOs, CMIs and whatnot, must maintain, as of necessity, professionally, at least a certain batch of cards that are not registered. The very nature of intelligence is that while you're maintaining internal security, state security, there must be people in the security services who are, in a sense, outside of the system. Whereas it's unethical, it's illegal to eavesdrop on people's conversations in an ordinary sense, but there must be people who do that for the wider good of the society. There must be people in the state that, quote unquote, break the laws to maintain the laws, if you see what I mean. The CID must be able to track you, must be able to wiretap your phone, must be able to eavesdrop, must be able to check your email.
In this particular
illegally.
case, you had not less than 17 SIM cards used in the execution of the operation against Susan Magara that finally took her life. And some of the SIM cards were registered in other people's names. And when you, even as a person who is not necessarily schooled in security matters, the level of sophistication, let alone the confidence that a group of kidnappers can have for 20 days holding somebody whose parents have reached the president. What does that say about the build of our security?
No, it's not that. That's what I say. It's not all these generic stocks or ability to handle basically criminal state is what you're dealing with. Just face it. Let's not beat about the bush. Those were intelligence operatives behind the kidnapping.
How do you know that?
Well, as I say, you can see that. But now you see, now you've begun this law school clarifying all this. Like I said, either people in the state machinery.
Okay, let's take a quick commercial break, and then when we return, right on that point, you're watching the On the Spot with me, Ivan Okuda, sitting in for Patrick Kamara, discussing matters of national security. Good evening. You're welcome back to this edition of On the Spot with me, Ivan Okuda, sitting in for Mr. Patrick Kamara, joined by Timothy Kaligera from Kampala Express, Prof.
Yes.
Christopher Mbazira from the School of Law of Makerere University, and the
Network of Public
Interest Lawyers, and Leah Erenyu, who is recently appointed to work with Akina Mama Africa.
Yes.
Tim, you're building a case for the possibility of the state possibly, not being...
Or people in the state, whether
trusted,
renegade
yeah.
or not. Yes, because like I said, who operates without registered SIM cards? Who, if you know Uganda's dysfunctional society, if you know our capacity, who can maintain, which ordinary kidnappers can maintain that degree of evasion of the state, of the services? Can't you just obviously see, people begin to put this together. There must be people within the system who are running this. I mean, the mother of the victim has been told to drop money at some place. She arrives at the place, and on the phone call, somebody says, why is a policeman with you? Next time you're going to drop the money at the appointed place, and the phone call comes in, why is there an intelligence person in the boot? Which kidnapper knows these things? So there must have been people, obviously, in the system who got to know what is going on. It was an operation, basically, could at the very least, one section, maybe let me just clarify from earlier, there must be people conducting the kidnapping, and then other people in the system who, essentially who they're coordinating this with. People within the intelligence services passing on information to the kidnappers. But then if people in the intelligence services who can only know that sort of detail, who can conduct that sort of surveillance real time, then it means it basically was from within the system. You can say it was renegade people, but that's what it was. It was an ordinary crime, this particular episode. Just that.
And if your narrative and possibly some people call it speculation is anything to go by, the question one would beg is, what would any state benefit from doing anything criminal, assuming what you're saying held water?
Look at all the clarifications. Well, there's a state called the Nazi in Germany that was criminal in its very nature. According to the narrative of the NRM, the state of Idi Amin was a criminal state. States can do things like this. The state of Syria is being viewed as a criminal state. In other words, this sort of civic view we have of we the citizens and a group of people called the state, whose duty it is to look after welfare. Sometimes states are run by criminals. Go through Uganda's history over the last 32 years, documented the carjackings and the everything. You remember that story? Or maybe you don't remember, but the story of the army smuggling cars to Congo, and the story that was published by the New Vision, and then the army threatened to sue the New Vision. From 1986, by the way, the carjackings that used to take place in the city, documented by newspapers that are publicly available. All these corruption cases, it's not the army. So that basically what's happening is that there is a wider controlled breakdown in security in the country. I stress the word controlled. And as political analysts like Charles Rumshana will tell you, this is the work of a mastermind. It is being planned. And so the questions become like, why? When Lieutenant Chris Aine vanishes, the police puts out a notice of 20 million shillings. And then he reappears after like about a month. In whose company? And then, so you think this is a person who, remember, had a scuffle with the presidential guard in Tongamo. Vanishes, the bounty is 20 million. An ordinary cashier, unknown to the public, it's 100 million. At the time, the police is telling us public they have no money. Why 100 million? Why this? Forget even the talk earlier of class and all this, but even then, it's more curious than just class. Why this? Why the attempt? Why the appearance of doing everything we can possibly? What's all that? And then, like I said, I asked you earlier, that letter by the president, if that's the president himself.
I must say, even as an ordinary reader of the letter, it sounded very casual. The letter that the president wrote,
beautiful Susie,
what should ordinarily be a condolence message, as casual as possibly his address was during the funeral at Andrew Felix Kaweesi's home. No mention of finer detail, and basically skirting around issues. And what does that say about possibly his commitment as commander-in-chief?
That's what I'm saying. You're still at this generic textbook thing of commander-in-chief is supposed to. Maybe if these were countries like Israel or South Korea or Brazil, the police would be summoning the president saying, just explain a few of these things. But because it's Uganda, somehow everybody's awed by the president. Nobody thinks, but this is odd. Why should it be the president in person to break the news of the body being discovered of this girl? You know, clues there. Why the president? Just think about it. We seem to see this thing.
Well, the president is the biggest consumer and beneficiary of intelligence.
Like I said, it's people. No. Like I said, had this been one of those countries like South Korea, Israel, they'll be saying the president is a person of interest in this matter. Just saying. But as I say, we've all been, all this fear of, if you say anything, then the media house can be closed. We're overwhelmed, the laws used against us, so we can't start thinking and saying, why this? Why? In his statements, like, I never got a chance to see her. But when you think about it, she's just a cashier at an obscure dairy. I never got a chance to see her. Is that in doubt? I mean, of course, as a president, it's not like she was an, deputy speaker of parliament or an MP or, minister of state or one of these top officials in the Bank of Uganda. But it's a cashier. Yeah, it's just a pity I never got to see her. Was there any possibility of ever going to see her? In that letter, hints are plenty. When you stop thinking of the president as a super god above the society. Like I said, Chris Aine vanishes. In whose company did he first appear?
Leah,
yes.
How much can we trust the Ugandan state, even from what Timothy is narrating, but also what the professor shared? If you have a state where the rule of law is as good as fractured, the institutions of the state under the justice, law and order sector are not a guarantor of safety for ordinary citizens, can we still have confidence and trust in the Ugandan state?
I tend to agree and also disagree with some of the things that Timothy said. But what I do see is the fingerprints of the state in a lot of the crimes that have been committed. There are criminal syndicates that have run amok, and the state has deliberately chosen to look the other way. I wouldn't go as far as to say that the state itself or members within it have actively participated in committing of the crimes, but I know that they've probably lent a hand. And I think the clearest example, because for me, Timothy probably has some connections that are feeding him intelligence. I'll simply just look at what the IGP said. 1 week he's giving a vote of confidence to a known criminal syndicate, and then the next week that person is getting arrested. So I think we would be very naive to trust our lives with the state, and I think a lot of Ugandans have come to realize that and have decided to take up different mechanisms of protecting themselves. People are putting up walls, people are putting up razor wires. Of course, that can only protect you so far. We just had news this evening that a woman was sitting in her car and her throat was slit in Boyagere. So you can be got anywhere. So your armored vehicle, your backup car or your lead car, as was in the case of Andrew Felix Kawesi, who was a police spokesperson at the time, basically tells us that we're on our own. The social contract that we have with the state, where we're giving up a few of our liberties, like what Timothy said about them listening in, although of course I don't agree with that, listening in on our conversations, and we're giving them our taxes in return. That contract isn't being honored by the state. We're doing everything we can. You know, you go to the police station, even with the simplest of cases, and you're required to fuel a police officer's car to go and arrest somebody that has committed a crime.
With your indulgence.
Yeah.
That begs a question. If the state has broken the contract between it and the people of Uganda, and part of the implied terms of that contract, as the case were, to the effect that we shall surrender some of our liberties to you, and in exchange for protection by you, if you have a spate of murders such as we've had in different parts of the country, and not just murders, kidnaps, rape, all forms of violence by citizens against citizens, or as Timothy would want to suggest, the state against citizens, and that has still not generated sufficient anger that can possibly be the basis of a certain form of popular uprising. Are we that helpless that that contract can be broken and everything remains normal?
I personally feel so helpless because I feel like we've been wronged so many times. We've probably been wronged worse than we have been now, and you know, nothing has happened. If you actually have a citizenry that is actually not even aware of that social contract, then they're not going to come and demand what is due them. If you have a population that is barely literate, thinks that the police, and basically for a lot of police posts, this is what they exist to do, to stamp papers when you need to, when you need a police verification for a job or something like that, then they're not going to demand any more than that. Actually, for a lot of people, they're going to go to the LC1, and that structure actually, now that we know, does not exist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Prof, let me quote Daniel Kalnaki in his esteemed column in today's Monitor. And this is what he says, writing about Susan Magara's murder. She joins a long list of victims of a society that has allowed millions to remain stuck at the bottom while failing to protect those willing to work hard and honestly. And Daniel basically in this piece speaks to the question of a society that has been ravaged by rising income inequality, even when, from the figures that are available, poverty levels have come down over the years, despite a hike as reported last year by UBOS, 3.4 million Ugandans slipping back into poverty. But by and large, from absolute poverty levels of 56% in the 90s to about 27% or 19%, depending on which report you're reading. But from what the Oxfam report, who is growing, released last year, tells us, you have a country that is basically one of haves against the have-nots, and the have-nots are basically the majority. Would this be a breeding ground for crime?
You see, when you look at countries across the world and try to pinpoint countries that have high levels of crime, it's largely not the poor countries, but it's mainly countries that have that huge income gap. South Africa is a very good example. We know that until recently, South Africa has always had the highest levels of crime. If you go to Latin America, Brazil is another very good example, where the income gap is also so huge. So poverty, of course, poverty is not a good thing, and every country should strive to ensure that not so many people, or at least that that people have the basics, or that a substantial number of people is living beyond the poverty line. But if the gap between the poor and the rich is expanding at an abnormal rate, then of course it results into social tensions, it results into high levels of crime, it results into a feeling that we are neglected, so we have to do something. it results into a sense of entitlement, you know, some form of income redistribution in a very rudimentary manner, which could be crime. And when you examine it closely, you see that even those persons that may be engaged in crime, they are perpetrators as much as they are victims. So there are factors that could explain, for instance, why persons find themselves at the bottom. It could be a result of failures of the state, but it could also be a result of failure of society itself. You can see, for instance, one thing that we see in the case of Uganda and probably so many African countries, this sense of community is disappearing. We have become so individualistic that, you know, you think about yourself first and then the rest follows. And that creates a sense of resentment. You see many people, when you get into a neighborhood which is relatively poor, and you construct a residential house, what's the first thing that you do? You put a perimeter wall. Actually, some people put a perimeter wall even before the actual construction starts. And what reasons do they give? This place is not safe, because probably they are not saying it expressly, but they could be saying because it's surrounded by so many poor people. So we create that class. That's why you see, for instance, if you get involved in a motor vehicle accident and you are driving and you run over a pedestrian, according to social perceptions in Uganda, you are guilty as long as you are driving. And there must be that process of...
And it's actually safer for you to drive away.
Yes, exactly. And there must be that process of ensuring that there's a redistribution of income from you people that drive vehicles and those of us that are poor and actually don't have access to the resources that you do.
What does that mean from a futuristic viewpoint? In a country where the estimates indicate that in the next decade you'll have a population twice the number that we have, and yet unemployment is going to keep increasing, and you add to that the rate of urbanization going up. So the population is increasing, getting fairly urbanized, but there is no money. There's no food for the many mouths that find themselves in town. And therefore, you have... Are we doomed as a nation?
I think we are, unless the state changes its political economics. We know that the political economics that the state has chosen to be guided by is one based on capitalism. You know, you earn as much as you work. Those that are not earning... Or
sometimes as much as you steal.
Probably. Those that are not working or those that are living in poverty, one could say it is their fault. And the state is playing a very, very minimal role. Yet we are seeing a process of globalization where global forces have come in, multinational corporations have come in, there is a process of state capture, and what is at the center of that state capture is maximizing profit. So I think we need a stronger state. We need a state that intervenes in the economy. Look at the fuel prices, for instance. Uganda is one of the few countries in the world that do not regulate fuel prices. So many countries, even countries that are democratically better, or countries that have better economies or that appear to be capitalistic, there are certain things that you have to regulate.
And what's your take on the narrative, Timothy, that perhaps you're dealing with a criminal state, that rather than put a bounty of 100 million shillings, you should possibly be pointing fingers and asking questions at those people that we've actually trusted with our own security?
I think to me the most important thing is to build mechanisms of accountability. You'll always have criminality in every country. You'll always have criminality irrespective of the way the state is structured. But the most important thing is, do you have mechanisms of accountability? And in this country, it appears we don't have mechanisms of accountability. For instance, if you have a case against a police officer, that police officer is going to be investigated by another police person. So you expect a fair, efficient investigation? Of course you don't. If there is a case of a police officer being unprofessional, you go to the professional standards unit, which is a department of the police force. So we have to review those structures. As much as Timothy may be having information that we don't have, he can't bring in his dimension, but at the same time we need to look at some of the things that Timothy may describe as law school lectures, because we are building a state and we must look at the law. Let me touch on SIM card registration, for instance. It has so many legal loopholes. One legal loophole, and which is fundamental, is you ask people to register SIM cards, but you don't have a data protection law. The way the registration is conducted, you give away so much information. You give away information with respect to your names, whatever number of names you have. You give away information where you stay. You even give away information in respect of your spouse and things like that. Yet, the telecom companies are not legally obligated to secure that information. I've received so many calls, and I'm sure my colleagues here could have received the same. You know, you receive a phone call of a con man, and he talks to you like he has known you for decades. Oh, Ivan, how are you? How is Monitor? They have information. How is Chiwature? Probably that's where you stay. Where did they get this information? So the SIM card registration process, if it's not properly streamlined, and if we don't have those subsidiary laws like data protection, could also be a recipe for disaster.
So someone would ask, what comes first? The debate of the chicken and the egg. If you have a state that cannot be trusted, as some people would opine, how much can that state be trusted, even in the presence of a data protection law? That perhaps
but at least put the principles in place, because those principles are for posterity. You are not looking at the individuals in the state. You are not looking at the current state as such, because those laws are going to be in place.
Let's take a quick commercial break, and when we return, more of this show. Good evening and welcome back to this edition of the On the Spot show. With me, Ivan Okuda, sitting in for Patrick Kamara, joined by Timothy Kalijira, Professor Christopher Mbazira, and Leah Irenyu. Tim, can the Ugandan state be trusted?
I said no.
Because at the center of it all is...
Can't be trusted.
If you have a state that has, number one, in terms of ability to deliver on investigations, performing below average. I was looking at statistics published in the Daily Monitor last year. 4,500 murders in the space of 4 years. And the success rate is just 2%. For the year of 2011, for example, they were only able to deliver on 19 successful investigations out of 1,034 reported. And this is evidence, statistically speaking, coming from the police itself. And basically, you have a state that cannot be trusted to deliver even on the basics. Are we a country that possibly should be asking questions about ourselves as a society and our ability to deliver on the basics?
As I just said, as long as we continue with this generic discussion of the function of the state, role of a state, role of police, and accountability to citizens, that's like a civics class, then we'll not be discussing what brought us here and what the whole country is discussing, the specifics that began with wave of fires, that was Buddha Junior School, and then market after market after market, then becomes schools, then becomes Kasubitums, then becomes Iron Bar Hitmen, and then becomes, John Magezi, Kawesi, and so on. Then becomes university students raped just near the gate. It becomes that sort of thing. Clear planning, clear thought, with the purpose of basically violence to send a political message as a political tool, scare the people. Well coordinated, well understood. So it's not that there's a failure to investigate these things. It is, there basically seems to be a plan around that. Then, as you said at the beginning of the show, the wave of murders of sheikhs, Muslim sheikhs. You can see each of those, the touch points. What do you do when you kill a sheikh, inflame the public, and that sort of thing? If we don't get to the bottom of that, then we start speaking essentially to ourselves, begin to speak almost like in contradictory terms. The state must guarantee us, but like I said, if there are units or elements of the state which have basically decided that's what they're going to do, that's it. I mean, you remember those fires in some of these markets. Out of the blue, it is fire begins, entire place razed to the ground within 2-3 minutes. Not like it goes through, different places, stores and whatnot, gradually, the natural fire caused by an electrical wire or something, but what looks like clearly explosions. On WBS TV at the time, one of these Buddha Junior children was saying, there we were, everything's okay, and suddenly this fire just sweeps to have this loud noise. That, of course, showed you either explosives or very highly inflammable materials, yes. That's not what the ordinary person does. That's not that's is beyond the capability of ordinary criminals and the audacity. Look at it which way. Like I said, from this case we're discussing to wherever, it is just that the letters in March last year being spread around massacre, and people with the audacity saying, if you don't leave 20,000 shillings behind, then we're coming for you. That organized way it was done, the reminders and all this, just too highly.
And of course, you have a press
organized
conference where somebody who is ostensibly a suspect comes and pins the police force and says, "What shall work with the police in these killings?"
So what are we discussing? That's why I just said that's where we are. You just said it. So
is that a stage of development that possibly?
I don't know about development economics and law and this workshop in which we are tonight on
that a state to go through. If you have trying to craft a state out of almost nothing, and therefore.
I do not
some
know.
people become victims.
No, but you see, this argument of it's a stage of, like I said, I mean, in 1985, when the Tito Obote government fell and Uganda was split into half with these NRA rebels take over Western Uganda, speak to people who were there at the time, they were going on as normal. Life was happening. There wasn't much looting in Western Uganda. And guess who came and robbed money from Bank of Uganda, Kabale, Bank of Uganda, Fort Portal, and UCB Kilembe? You remember that story? Your friends, the NRA rebels, who claimed they would repay it when they took power. Like I said, from day one, go through the newspapers of the time. I've had people eulogizing Teddy Seziche as saying, he was the first person to, bring the government to account, expose his wrongs. Go through these early newspapers from day one, around this time, 32 years ago, 1986, carjackings by officers mentioned, and they got to get away scot-free.
Does this speak to possibly something for study? Anything you
I don't
know
about study. I think we do a bit too much
about the Ugandan state,
study.
because like you've stated, Timothy, right from Idi Amin, Milton Obote, and even the colonial state, because there's a lot of evidence of criminality by the colonial state. So you're talking about a space of not less than 55 years post 1962, and the character of the Ugandan state has been essentially, for all intents and purposes, criminal.
What criminality under Idi Amin? Let me just ask my usual test question.
The same criminality you're talking about here.
What criminality?
Congo easy, man.
The 500,000 people. Anyway, I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Personally, I wouldn't go so far as I would think there is some validity to what Timothy is saying. But I think this is just a case of state agents going rogue. For the continuation and for the success of the NRM government, it has required that some people carry out its dirty work without the steps leading back directly to them. But they were given a carte blanche, which means that then they've overstepped their mandate. If you have, I talked about criminal syndicates like Kifesi and Border 2010. These are elements that are actually known by the police, and the police has chosen to look the other way. And they've chosen to look the other way because they were attacking people that were essentially against the government. So this worked in their favor. But now we could say that the child has outgrown its shoes and perhaps wants more than it can chew. So I think that is that's the point at which we are now. And this is catalyzed by obviously very egocentric fighting amongst the heads of the
security agencies?
The security agencies. And I think that this is actually just acting as a catalyst, because now it's in the interest of the different heads to expose the dirty laundry or the criminal enterprises that are actually going on in the different security agencies. But these are things that have been going on, but perhaps they have been under better control. And so I think really it's time for the president to step forward.
We call upon the government.
We call upon no. I think what would make sense is
the eulogy. Just interrupt you with your indulgence. The eulogy of the sister to the late Susan Magara speaks quite volumes about, number one, her frustration with the person of the president. Number two, frustration with the police, and frustration in the sense of we don't have confidence in you, and possibly even trust. that is the message that comes from a family member, and she says if she had a way, possibly she could co-opt Australia or the US to come and help the family in a kind of private investigation.
Yeah.
And that possibly speaks to just how much mistrust there is between citizens and the state.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you ask the president to step forward and the family member is telling you, perhaps
and
we need a whole apparatus
for me,
investigated.
I'm actually involving the president in this conversation because for me, ordinarily, the buck would stop with the chief of police. But the president is such a micromanager and wants to involve himself in everything. And that is how we've ended up saying, and he's the one in charge of appointing the chief of police. And so that is how he ends up getting involved in this. When the women were getting murdered in Entebbe, he decided to do a photo op and go and investigate the murders himself, essentially giving a vote of no confidence to his own police chief. Yes? So, and then obviously having a written statement, and also calling the parents of Susan to say that she had been murdered. He's involved in things that he should not be involved in. He should be running the entire country. He should not be Sherlock Holmes.
And in the statement he says, I advise the young people to avoid alcohol, to avoid umalaya.
None of what she was doing. She was on her way. She was on her way to the gym. So that's why I was saying she did not fit that narrative. She could not be dismissed like the other women, because I was saying the women of the night, the prostitutes.
Okay. Prof,
Yeah.
how does a country reach a level where violence becomes normal? You have episodes of criminal gangs that are backed fully by the Uganda police and others backed by other security agencies such as Boda Boda 2010 and Chifes and all these groups going live on TV and bragging about how they're unleashing violence against the Ugandan citizens. And, you know, it's normal for criminal elements in the Ugandan space to act with the kind of impunity that we see. So you have normalized violence. How did you get where we are?
You know, some form of force is necessary in society because there are circumstances that require force. But the question is, who has the monopoly of force? And in the traditional state, it should be state structures that should have the monopoly of the use of force, which they should use within a regulated system with proper laws. But now what the state has done in recent times is that it has lost that monopoly. In some cases, deliberately.
Has it lost
so, for
monopoly?
instance, when you give up your monopoly of use of force and you give it to Boda Boda,
or simply just decentralize the monopoly.
Give it to Boda Boda 2010. When you give up your monopoly of use of force and you give it to crime preventers, then you've lost it. Because you see, when you use force in a controlled environment, it has a command structure. Armed forces are in uniform, they can be identified. There are processes, of course, legally those processes may not be so effective. There could be loopholes here and there, but at least you know. But if you give up that force, taking it back becomes a bit of a problem. When you have, for instance, a police force that is structured in such a way that you are not sure whether you are dealing with a trained police officer or you are dealing with somebody that has come from the army or you are dealing with a crime preventer or Boda Boda 2010, then it becomes a bit of a problem.
Somebody would ask, is that how the state works and not how it fails? That, you know, it's just part of the design. It's not by accident that you have decentralized violence.
You can decentralize violence, but in a controlled manner and within the structures. Do you know how many security agencies the US has? It could be over 200 security agencies that are empowered to use force. But you know, it is used in a controlled, in a coordinated manner. What we see here, you have people that have guns. You don't know where they got the guns. You have people that are using force and nothing happens to them. When Boda Boda 2010 beats up young kids at Busega, nothing happens to them. When Chifesi and what were they called, the Chiboko Squad, for instance, beat up demonstrators, nothing happens to them. You see them alongside the formal police structures. It becomes a bit of a problem. So I think one of the things that needs to be done, and this is why I could use a phrase that may not augur very well with Timothy, to serve a government to yambe, to remonopolize its use of force, to take back its use of force. to ensure that the guns are in the right hands, to ensure that there is proper accountability when force is misused, to ensure that force is used within the confines of the law, and that if you use force outside the confines of the law, irrespective of who you are, there are consequences. There are consequences. You have to account. I think that's what we need to do, and we need to work backwards, especially in terms of the police. We must.
But one would ask maybe if that would not be in the ideal, because clearly the Ugandan context is one where the state thrives from not doing that which you think it should be doing.
Is
that the case?
You see, even for the state, it's like cloning a beast. It starts small, then it grows, and actually you become a victim yourself. So we are getting there slowly to a point where the state itself is becoming a victim. When you authorize so many persons to use force in an informal manner, when you have so many parallel reporting lines where they say, these are so-and-so's boys, these are so-and-so's boys, and they are mentioning individuals, they are not mentioning structures and offices, then you get to a point where you simply can't control, and actually you yourself becomes a victim. And that's actually what is happening. So we need to go back. Look at, for instance, in terms of the police, we need to go back and see how are police officers recruited. Is it based on merit? Are they properly identified? How are they trained? The police training itself, in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the methods that are used. How are police officers promoted, for instance? How are police officers deployed? Then what are the systems of accountability? Are those systems effective? Because we are getting to a state where we have a criminal police. We are getting to a state where the state has, where the police has been infiltrated by criminals, and that is something that we have to deal with.
And how do you deal with that if, as Timothy and others out there would say, it's by design that the police should be criminal, that you should have criminals manning some of these operations and doing criminal stuff?
But we have to demand. We have to demand. We have to demand as citizens. We have a right. We are shareholders in this state. As shareholders, we have to demand. And we have to rally all citizens to actually demand. We are how many shareholders? 38 million? We have to rally the majority of the shareholders to demand that certain things must be done.
Tim, how does a society that has essentially been held hostage by an entity whose acts, for all intents and purposes, criminal in nature, to sustain its survival, if you have a state whose survival, as some people would argue, is dependent on criminality, criminal acts?
Leave them fight, and then watch the pieces fall, because that's what's going on. Here we are, as I say, we're still at this generic level, like it's a civics class, second year law. What are the rights of a citizen? Protection, life, election, and all this. What's the reality? Power struggle within the state over the question of succession to Yoweri Museveni. Will it be from within his family? Will it be from within the party? Then there's something I mentioned on KFM last December, when this tension starts building up between of CMI investigating the police and the breakup of the border 2010 and so on, the angle of the tensions between Uganda and Rwanda. That is the bigger story, of which much of this is a sub-story. I did write about these things, and as I said, did say them on the KFM, and nobody denied them. The fact that relations between these two countries have returned to the late 1990s level, the fights in Kisangani and whatnot. And as I said, I think, for better or for worse, the state here might believe that the police of Uganda has, forget the criminal side, that the state here either has been infiltrated by Rwanda or is working with Rwanda or is sympathetic with, in which case we're going to see for the rest of this year slow and steady disbanding of the police, which starts by the arrest of some of these vocal people like the Mohamed Chiromeros, or statements that lead the Inspector General in ceremonial uniform to announce to his officers, do not share information with ISO. That itself was a major statement. I'm surprised we haven't discussed it yet. By the time, NTV and Daily Monitor sister companies, imagine the day a decree from NTV says, do not share any news with your colleagues at Daily Monitor. That level of breakdown. Then the news of the police has no funds. They're only going to get 5% or something.
Yeah.
you can see what's going. Now there's an actual event going on. It's not just this generic talk of the state and all this. Essentially, even starve the police of funds. So you're going to see many more police activities just coming to standstill. So the contradiction of the police, on one hand, having no resources, on the other hand, suddenly, when you have no resources, when you offer 100 million shillings of a bounty, you know, these little things that give away the plot. And then the Border 2010, yes, is a vigilante group working on behalf of the police. All okay as long as break up the FDC and the other protest rallies. But the minute the thought of infiltration coming from foreign country, hostile from this point of view, must be broken up and whatnot. So what we're going to see for the rest of this year is a purge of the police. And I don't know how they're going to deal with that in fighting over the succession question, because there are also factions interested. And I'm not just talking about the general NRM. I'm talking of the rumors you've heard for years and years about who has the right of succession to the president among his family, is where there's another pressure point. And then also the abduction of Charles Etukuri. That and what it is that caused, what he wrote and then caused him to get arrested, a lot of that. By the time intelligence agents abduct a writer, not of the quote-unquote the enemy paper, the Daily Monitor, but the state paper, the New Vision, that's where it's gotten to. So in terms of a timeline, we are, I guess, in the early months equivalent of 1985. Ordinary people are listening in, you know, pop music and all this, Michael Jackson, The Lion Riches and all this. Inside the army is tensions between Acholi and Langi, and it's reached that level, by the way, here. And the volcanoes begin to like blow up, but not visible to the public. Then around June, there's an OAU summit in Addis Ababa. President Obote does not attend because the situation in a crisis. July the 8th, the shooting at Bugolobi between units of Acholi and Langi. Paulo Mwanga, the Minister of Defense, Vice President, says that was just an uncoordinated troop movements, don't worry. And 2 weeks later, the coup. We're at that stage. Basically, it's not just a general question of...
Are you speaking to, you know, a possible anti-climax?
What's that?
I mean, the possible climax to, you know, a 30-year plus regime that has possibly approached...
Where things are, for things I'll not discuss here, where matters have gotten to right now, I don't know what it's going to take, but that's the direction and the trend within the system. It is much more serious than any of us imagine. And
of course, in some of, you know, our history as a country is also dotted with examples of murders that have gone unresolved, from about, you know, touching fairly high-profile people. I think one time you documented when Kawis was killed, senior security officials that have, from the 1960s, either disappeared or been gunned down, and there are no explanations. And anything that we can borrow from such a history of a country that has murders happening and the state is a key suspect and life simply moves on.
1970, January, Brigadier Okoya, the commanding officer of the 1st Infantry Division, is shot dead, him and his wife Anna, outside the home in Acholi. Tensions already within the government, so Idi Amin, the army commander, is the suspect. So the police goes to investigate, but it is not Idi Amin who killed Okoya. Okoya was actually a friend of Amin, very good friends and whatnot. In fact, in those meetings in the Defense Council where there was this plan to silence Amin, Okoya will defend his friend Idi Amin. And then people arrested, and to cut a long story short, during the peace talks in Nairobi in August 1985, Henry Gombia, the BBC correspondent, asks General Tito Okello, the new military head of state, to tell us about the death of Okoya. And he says in his book in Swahili, the Bote government killed Okoya. That's a story. Why Okoya? Because Okoya had attempted a coup. It's a whole long story, but like I said, the intrigue's going on. This Okoya had attempted a coup at the time when Milton Obote was shot at Lugogo. Okoya had used that opportunity to, like, you know, marshal troops and whatnot, apparently to, you know, keep peace. But when the GSU investigated intelligence service said, but this was more than just a coup, so it is the GSU that shot dead Okoya, blamed it on Idi Amin. That's the dark history, if you want it to get any darker than that. So anyway, where we are right now is this. That's just that. ISO doesn't see eye to eye with the police. The Inspector General of Police says do not cooperate with...
And now we're told the police is going to investigate ISO for alleged kidnap of a Congolese lady who recently resurfaced.
What Paul Mwanga called uncoordinated troop movements, as I said a few minutes ago. Now,
from a political analysis viewpoint, does this offer any form of excitement to people who want regime change? That perhaps, perhaps going by Uganda's history that you've ably taken us through the pages
we
of,
shall soon be dancing the streets and whatnot.
that you might soon have a whistle of this uncoordinated movement of troops delivering.
Well, it's going on and on. Like I said, the things going inside. But I would speak to various sources and whatnot. Speak to people in the media. They will tell you the volcano is blowing up from within, but not visible on the outside. Thank good. For once, the Luganda expression of we can now at least sleep is valuable for us. You just don't want to know what's going on. But anyway, as you say, right now it's reached a stage where even the management of information can no longer work. Now it's just like out in the open. As I said, it's now reached a stage where you can't contain it, and as you said, now it's gone front page news, this versus the other and whatnot. By the time it gets front page news, even with the government media, just imagine what's going on inside the system. So I think where we are going forward in 2018, I can't offer anything of comfort except to say now it is like downhill. And the closer you go downhill, the faster, of course, is that like the way the propellers of plane, they start off like this and then faster and faster. It's just that I do not know President Museveni has been masterful in the past at juggling all these different things. But I think this is the year when, as he juggles his balls, a few are going to start falling down. Yes, he'll continue retaining the critical ones, but several are going to start falling apart. All these things, you remember the news we've almost forgotten now. You remember 2016, the arrest of the base command in NTV? You remember that? Yeah. And where that story ended and what was it? And then one night in Gulu, last 2016, once again, remember, sudden shooting for hours and it goes off. And then attacks on the Kapchora police station, and the attackers go to the military, the army barracks and whatnot. And then forget the Kasese Renzururu fight, but the one of 2013, there's so much just going on. But
and then the attack on Buya barracks?
Buya barracks, whatnot, 2013. Although that one was, won't get into it here. But it's, but basically that's where we're going. And
but
then
for the Ugandans watching you after a very difficult day, thanks to traffic jam caused by the rain, where does this leave them in terms of? Because at the end of the day, if you're a Ugandan citizen, two things matter to you in respect of this particular topic. Number one is your security as a citizen. And number two, security of property.
But like I said, what do we do? I mean, it's you like I was just saying, what you build like a 40-high wall and such, they will get you like what you get. You think maybe when you're so high profile, okay, border people are hit and whatnot, but high profile, middle, run accountants, Akash, at case clinic, and then Akashi here. It's that random. Ajoan Kagezi. If the Assistant Inspector General of Police.
Foreign nationals
in hotels, a whole lot. So then what do you do? So where is your safeguard? Do you stay indoors? They'll come for you indoors. You've had in Masaka, they drilled holes. What do you do if they come for you in Masaka and they'll like drop you all this? You keep quiet, but then most victims of these incidents tend to be the ordinary people. Big mouths like us who start alleging things like we did in 2010 of those bombs of the World Cup were not by Al-Shabaab. Somehow seems so. Since there's no formula, what's the answer to your question? I guess just wake up every day and thank God you're alive, because there's just no formula.
Or what the scientists talk about adaptation to climate change. If you can adapt to climate change, you've got to adapt to the political situation. But Leah, the US embassy usually issues what they call tribal advisories. And there's one that's been making rounds on social media, issued sometime Jan 10th, 2018. From
the State Department website.
Yes, Uganda is ranked level 2. Level 2 means someone has to exercise increased caution if they're coming to Uganda due to crime. And this is a quotation from that tribal advisory. Violent crime such as armed robbery, home invasion, and sexual assault is common, especially in larger cities including Kampala and Entebbe. Local police lack the resources to respond effectively to serious crime. And then if you decide to travel to Uganda, number 1, do not physically resist any robbery attempt. Number 2, food and drinks should never be left unattended in public, especially in local clubs. Number 3, remain with a group of friends in public. 4, use caution when walking or driving at night. Now, this is the world's military power, ostensibly biggest economy, depending on which pages you're reading. And this is what it's telling the world. Uganda, level 2.
Just before Leah comes in, I just ask the viewers, try an experiment. Many of you have smartphones. Go to Google, and in Google, type in the word murders. No other word, just type in the word murders and see what it brings you up. Just as you're watching this show, go to your smartphone, to Google, and type in the word murders, and see what follows.
So, yeah, what does this leave Uganda? Because people like Amos Wekesa in the tourism industry, and people like BMK,
type in murders and see what follows.
BMK in the hotel industry are possibly having to think about the implication of all this on the economy at large, but more specifically tourism, but also the image of a country called Uganda.
Yeah. I don't think there are really any illusions about our image. We're that country that has always been used as a basket case. If you've seen any Hollywood movie recently, whenever they're talking about an obscure, unstable country in Africa, they'll talk about Uganda. I actually thought the travel advisory had been made recently after the Finnish national and the Europeans were killed. So I'm surprised to hear that
was Jan 10th.
That was actually in January. Of course, it speaks volumes because but then I'll also say, and maybe cautiously, that sometimes because we live in different environments, some people tend to overreact. Americans are, of course, very concerned about their citizens and usually issue travel advisories, the moment, the body count piles up to about 5 or slightly more. So sometimes it can be alarmist. And that's why I felt that...
How alarmist can it be in a country where you have, from the figures, 4,500 unresolved murders in a space of just 4 years?
Yes, and of course I'm saying that there is some truth to it, but I don't know how spread out those 4,500 murders over. Well, you've told me the period of time, how consistently they were committed.
And so systematic that even in a hotel, you're not safe.
Exactly.
A 5-star hotel.
So, exactly. So that's why I thought the advisory had been made recently, because for me that would make sense.
Okay. Let's
but just very quickly, just to finish, because you'd asked about tourism and whatnot.
Can you come back to that after break?
Of course, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You can.
Or I could continue.
Okay.
Obviously, it affects our tourism. If you're looking at gorilla permits, for example, gorilla permits are more expensive in Rwanda, but a lot more people actually prefer to go to Rwanda for gorilla trekking, even if we have more of them and ours are cheaper. And that's because Kigali has a reputation of a clean, safe city.
Okay.
And so when the Americans are going there, they're feeling very safe, very protected, and they're going to enjoy their experience.
Okay.
So it definitely affects us.
We need to run out of studio. Time is up. Prof,
yes.
Your last word as we close the show.
It's just fear. I'm engulfed by fear because we are not safe. No one feels safe at the moment. As I said, I think society needs to rise up and demand for accountability. Society needs to rise up and demand that the security forces address the deficiencies that they have. We need to see more coordination between the different security agencies, including ISO, including the police and others. And
your team, your last word? And possibly you can also share your condolence with the Teddy Sezche family, to which we express our most heartfelt sympathies after that very sudden death.
Well, my last word is really just, as I said, knowing not only the current situation, much of which, of course, I can't discuss on air right now, don't risk the station being closed, but also going back the last so many years, just lose hope is the kindest thing I can say to Ugandans.
Lower your expectations, you mean?
Wow.
Just give up hope, all ye that live in this land.
All right, Leah, give us hope.
How ominous. I don't share.
Put it kindly.
I don't share Tim's gift of foresight, but he paints a very ominous picture, and he seems to have some evidence. I don't, so perhaps I'm comforted by not knowing what's actually going on and what's cooking. I think I would just say let's keep on keeping on, but I think I'd also be very happy if the president got rid of the police chief. And, you know, there were actually some efforts put into deliberately restructuring the police force and trying to clean house. I think that would help placate the public, and maybe that is where we'll get our hope, even if it might be a false hope, according to Timothy. But I think that has to happen.
Okay, well, others might say if the top doesn't change, even if you remove the shoulder, much won't change. But welcome to the end of this show. On the spot, I've been Ivan Okuda, who's sat in for Patrick Kamara. I was joined by Timothy Kalijera from Kampala Express, also columnist with the Sunday Monitor, and he does a lot of writing outside those two publications. Professor Christopher Mbazera from the School of Law of Makerere University, where he is principal, and Leah Erenyu, who will, in the next few days, be head of research and advocacy at Akina Mamawa Africa. We're discussing matters of national security. We hope and pray that we all shall remain safe, and those in whose hands the security of the citizens of this country will execute that duty with diligence, honesty, and a sense of public good. Thank you, and have a good night.